Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this podcast, which is part of a series of podcasts we're doing called Ideas into Action, Inspiring Leaders to Mobilize Collective Solutions, which is the theme of the Global Leadership Exchange in Ottawa in June. My name is Peter Molyneux. I use he, him, and I am the England lead for the Global Leadership Exchange. And I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Keri Opai. And Keri, I think you're going to introduce yourself to us.
Ka te hiauro tātou tēnā koe, Peter, me arana ki au koutou wakarongo maina, mātakitaki maina I te au kāinga. That's right, Pete. Hey, thank you for, today. I really appreciate it. Just to the audience, my name is Keri Opai. I'm from my iwi nations here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Te Aotearoa, Ngāti Ruanui, Waiohua, Ngāti Te Ata, Ngāti Porou. So those are all my sort of iwi affiliations there. And I'm, kind of lucky and sort of privileged enough to be doing some interesting work that we're going to talk about today. So, look, I'm really looking forward to it. Kia ora.
Well, you're most welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it. So, tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing, Keri.
Lots and sort of lots of different things, but
yeah.
I kind of wanted to mainly concentrate on my work to do with creating Māori words. So, Māori people are the indigenous people of Aotearoa. So Māori words to do with mental health, disability, addiction, things like that, because a lot of them either sort of didn't really exist in the past or certainly needed an update. So I thought, well, I was, lucky enough to be taught by my elders here in my home Taranaki, my home region on the west coast of the North Island. So I was lucky enough to be sort of brought up with that privilege, really, to be taught by our elders and to speak the language, fluently. And so I thought maybe I can, help with some of those gaps and concepts, because we kind of, Māori people had more concepts of looking after people rather than kind of defining them by certainly medical models and deficit models and that. So I was, again, very privileged to work with people that like Manase Elua and others around the world, actually, to try and create some of these concepts, and in a real honoring way, in a way that honors people, that takes a non-medical, sort of non-judgmental sort of style and looks at it from an indigenous lens and a Māori lens. So I sort of set about, almost 10 years ago now, sort of creating these concepts and words and or updating them. So I think probably the one that most people around the world are familiar with, and probably some of the audience, would be the one for autism, which is takiwātanga. That's takiwātanga. So that was the word I created for autism. But kind of the way I created that word and concept was the same that I did for many sort of words to do with again, addiction, disability, mental health, and really it was a very collaborative approach. We Māori people tend to think about community, what is good for the community, not sort of so much the individuals. And I thought, if I can get the concepts right for, say, something like autism or cerebral palsy and a lot of other ones that I've worked on, it uplifts the respect for people, and they can sort of define themselves better. So I kind of combined, sort of indigenous thinking, Māori knowledge, with, working with clinicians, with people that were autistic, um, and coming up with a concept that was very, I think, respectful, and seems to have, resounded around the world. So
Mhm.
takiwātanga, coming from the concept of takiwā, uh, their, his, her, my own time and space. And I felt that that was honoring of autistic people because, from my experience with my really, really good mate, Peter, funny enough, who is autistic. And, I used to protect him at school because he'd get
Mhm.
beaten up by all the bullies.
Mhm.
Terrible. The four guys would be beating him up and I'd stand in the way and they would inevitably go away because they might get, a punch
Mhm.
back or something. And, we're still mates. And that is, can we say, many decades since then. But,
Okay.
we would go to the movies and we still go to the movies now, go to the movies and he'd laugh at all the wrong places. And, things like that, that made me think, well, it's very much like when I would spend time with my elders and you had to sort of lean into their way of seeing the world and their rhythm and their life pace and, all those sort of things. And so I thought Taki Wātanga, their own time and space, really kind of sums that up, in a respectful way.
Mm.
So that's kind of been not the only one, but certainly one of the main sort of words and concepts that has sort of resonated around the world. I still get emails from, you know, all around the world saying, thank you for coming up with this non-deficit model, this non-medical model that we can relate to. I expected it maybe to have an impact in Aotearoa in New Zealand, but
Yeah.
I did not expect it to sort of go around the world like it has.
Mm. And what kind of impact has it had? I mean, in Aotearoa.
I think I can probably sum it up best with, I mean, huge, but for me, the impact is clearly sort of defined and articulated by a family coming up to me, crying and saying, "Thank you for defining, a Māori word that our son can be proud of. He's proud of who he is now, and just this one family in particular, but many families, they were in a very, very bad place. They had the diagnosis there, autistic. They were just, not doing well with it. And my concept just made them go, oh, actually, you know what? It's a gift. It's a journey we're all on.
Yeah.
And it just changed their thinking, as it has for many people. And but by sort of redefining it and not again the sort of this is normal, this isn't model, that actually, we all have our special time and place and gifts and all the rest of it. Um, it it's it's uplifted their what we would call mana, the respect
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
themselves. And so, so yeah, literally, autistic families and people come up to me and say, just, thank me, shake my hand, you know, give me a hug sometimes just to say, thank you for what you've done. And that's just kind of the example of one of the sort of things that I wanted to do really was just about humanity, just about natural respect for people. Just like my mate at school, four bullies would be beaten up, and I just think, why would you do such a thing? And so with takiwātanga, with all the other words I've created, I always try and think it through like, what is honoring? What is indigenous? What is Māori thinking? How would we define that sort of thing? And if possible, what is something a little bit more positive? Many people are just living with these labels, and their whole sort of culture and what they think of themselves tends to be defined by other people and medical models and deficit models. And I thought, well, I'm sure I can help with that. I'm sure I can do better than that. So that's kind of the work that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I can see why it's important to find the right words and the right framing in different, I'll say a cultural context, for want of a
Yeah,
better,
yeah,
better
of course.
description. But it's the fact that it's travels to other cultures as well,
Yeah,
and that's really interesting, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, like I sort of thought at the start. I mean, I hoped it would have an impact here in
Mm,
Aotearoa, but I wasn't prepared for the response from you know countries all around the world. They want me to come over and speak about it, or at least do a Zoom, or
yeah,
all around the world, and just from families, organizations, just a family the other day from Argentina just said thank you for creating this word that we can relate to.
yeah,
You know, yeah, it's been
absolutely,
great. I've been so grateful and pleased that it's helped other people as well.
yeah. So you've given some really nice and powerful examples of how it has helped people in the context of their family and their community. Has it had an impact on clinicians and caregivers?
I mean, I think yes, but probably I don't get as much sort of response
Mhm.
from that the employment sort of side of things. I mean, for instance, our you know ministry of disabled people
Mhm.
is called Whaikaha.
Yeah,
That's a word that's come out of the work that we've done, you know, um, to redefine what disability is. So it came from one of our elders. He passed away last year, um, Marka Tibble, and that the whole ministry is called that Whaikaha, which means to be able-bodied, differently abled. So rather than disabled. So that's just an example, but on a national level.
yeah, yeah. That's really powerful. Thank you. So, what are some of the challenges that you're having getting this implemented? And I mean, and what do you see coming towards you over the horizon?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the challenges have changed.
Mm,
So when I first started off, and Manasi was with me when I first sort of started off, and he saw the splashback really that people would say, "Who are you to do this? How dare you?" And not that sort of thing. A lot of that negative sort of response, and I sort of would answer with, "Well, who else should be doing it? And if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it."
mm,
Um, and so that was kind of the beginning. And then, as of course, the words got out there, and people started not only accepting them but thinking, "Well, actually, this is a bloody good idea." Uh, and had such good responses from around the world. A lot of that negative sort of energy and response, that sort of stuff, changed where they actually wanted to get on board, and saw the sort of beauty of it really. So that's changed. But the reality is that a lot of the stuff that I do is voluntary. I mean, nobody's sort of saying, "Hey, here's lots of money that you need to do
mm,
this." I do this in my spare time
mm.
mostly. So what would be great is, I mean, we need thousands of words, and it's kind of just me doing it. One of the groups that I work with about eating disorders and Māori terms for that, one of them said to me, "If you weren't doing this, who would be doing it?" And I said, "Well, unfortunately, nobody. It's such a specific sort of set of skills that's required. A licensed interpreter, um, working with clinicians in the health sector. Just there's so much to it that actually there's very few people that could do it."
Mm.
And it's not a funded thing pretty much. So what I would love to see is actual money and investment, and commitment put into it, so that this really should be a full-time job, not when I can fit it in between all my other things, working for my people and communities and things like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd like apprentices. I'd like to teach other people how to do it, because it's incredibly important, I think, to not only have the right sort of translation, but the motivation, the responsibility behind it, all that sort of stuff, and the concepts. I was taught by elders, so I'm lucky enough to be able to bring that into what I do. But that's pretty unusual, for anywhere, let alone Aotearoa. So it's really quite a specific set of skills. So that would be great, and that's kind of the difficulties I see coming up is the same sort of difficulties that I've had to face for 10 years now, which is it's just me, not much
Yes.
time. I'm doing it in my spare time, and sometimes I get a koha, which is a contribution. People give me some money or food sometimes, that sort of thing, but it's not a funded thing. It's not a full-time job like it should be, because we have a dearth of these sort of concepts and words,
Yes.
and we need to be working on it.
And it sounded, when you were giving the example of Takiwatanga, that you needed a good understanding of Maori, but you also needed to understand the person, or you
Yeah,
needed to have a good dialogue with the individual as well. So it's not
yeah.
just about knowing about the language, is it? It's
No, no, not at all.
uh,
So exactly that. See, so there are other, obviously, sort of licensed interpreters, but
mm,
those words, I mean, sometimes they take years to create. And
yeah,
I don't think everyone gets that.
mm,
I often get sort of people just sort of ringing up and saying, "Oh, hey, can you make us up a word sort of for this?" And no, I really can't do that. Um, Takiwatanga, I think that took 6 months of thinking about it. Cerebral palsy took a year. Just
yeah,
it takes a long time because you've got to work those things out. Slowly and surely, and it's kind of art and science put together,
mm, mm,
with some indigeneity and spirituality, all of those things to get it right. And so that again, people think I sort of just sit in my ivory tower and create these things, and that's just not the way it works. And as it shouldn't,
mm,
in from an indigenous perspective, it's community.
yeah.
So
So it has to be
I
co-created.
consult with, and a real consultation,
Mm,
um, with hundreds of people over years to get this right. So recently I went to the IHC, which is the sort of our department of sort of intellectually disabled people, and had a meeting with disabled people, with intellectually disabled people. Great bunch, bloody very cheeky. I really enjoyed that. And I talked with them about the word and concept that I had for intellectual disability,
mhm,
and
mhm,
same sort of thing, very respectful. This uplifts your mana, your respect, and all that sort of stuff. So in the end, and I consulted with other people as well, but especially with this group, they were the advisory group, and intellectually disabled people got to look at my word, my concept, did a PowerPoint sort of thing, and talked it through with each one of them, and they got to say whether they liked it or not. And I would have gone back to the drawing board if they hadn't have liked it. That's the point. There's no point in me coming up with this wonderful bloody word, and actually the people that it is about and affects, and it's sort of should be centered on,
mm,
doesn't agree, or they
mm,
don't like it, or for whatever reason. And I was prepared to go back to the drawing board, but in the end they did like it. But that's that's the sort of thing that you have to do in order to get this right.
yeah.
you know
But
um
but if we want more, to use a sort of, to use a professionalized word, more person-centered care, and we want people to feel empowered and have a more positive view
yeah.
of themselves, then this strikes me as being really quite important, because language
Oh,
is so important.
essential.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, so the old people would say, "E mana tō te kupu." Words have great power.
yeah.
So it's a kind of a different sort of spinning it from sticks and stones will break my bones. In Māori thinking, actually, words are very important. You you
Mm,
you can't take an insult back if you give one. So those, all those sort of concepts, were things I had to think about when I'm creating these things.
mm,
yeah, our language is incredibly important because you literally
Mm,
define yourself by
mm,
that.
mm.
So, that's kind of the proud, pleasing, moment when people come up to me sometimes in the supermarket, just say thank you for the words that have made us feel good about ourselves, and our son can define himself as this, and my daughter's proud of who she is, and it means everything. It's great.
So in terms of what other leaders can could do you think more leaders could come alongside you and come into this space? Is there a possibility for that?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, basically, what I'm hoping that we'll be able to do, um, going forward, is sharing this journey and work with other peoples around the world. Specifically, sort of the next step for me is in Polynesia. So I spent a
Yeah,
lot of time in different islands in Polynesia in general, and talked about this sort of stuff and the concepts that I've come up with, and it's Māori language. We're all related, sort of thing in Polynesia. You can do this too, and it's kind of like a revelation that it's like they've never sort of thought about it before, and the the way that some people are defining some of these things in mental health, addiction, disability, they're not positive. They're really negative. And so it kind of gives them permission to think about, well, if Māori people can do it, we can do it.
yeah,
And that's kind of my hopefully my next step in Polynesia. But I'm also working with people, around the world to sort of look at their own languages and work, kind of based on the a similar concept. What are if you have a gap. So I'm working with a person in the Philippines at the moment who's trying to look at the Tagalog language, and what can they do? And if there's a dearth there, if there's a gap there, well, why not fill it with these sort of concepts that uplift somebody's mana, someone's respect. So I have had interaction here around the world, sort of even non-indigenous people going, well, these are amazing concepts, because it's not, again, plucked out of the air. There is science there.
yeah,
There's clinician help there, all that sort of stuff. It's just that it's more human-centered. It's more about people, about the person. It's not from a person in a lab coat saying this is who you are. Um, so a lot of people around the world have related to it. Yeah,
yeah. And as you say, it's really important in terms of then f taking a a less of a deficit based approach,
yeah,
and it moves
yeah.
you to a
I mean,
more asset
at the
based.
very least, I thought, and when I I did work with the Drug Foundation, and redefining sort of some concepts there, and I went to the opening, and I just and I said to the people there, were probably 200 people, I said, you've got enough to deal with. At least the language could support you.
Mm,
If nothing else, that's kind of the least we can sort of hope for. So, and I I often say, look, I wish I could cure cancer, but I don't know how to do that. And there are people working on that around the world. It's only me doing this, but hopefully it's helping. It's making a contribution that is helping people with what I can do with the power of language.
yeah,
So that's kind of my motivation for it. It is helping people.
yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Um, One of the questions we like to ask is, what advice would you give to someone starting out now?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think anything that goes towards helping people, uplifting people, um, if that is the kaupapa, if that is the motivation, that's the topic, the subject, the thing that you're basing your work on, it's got to be a good thing. Be a leader, and sometimes that means, um, you know, just again from that example of when I first started, when people were saying, "You can't do this, how dare you?" All that sort of stuff. I said, um, "Well, I'm going to do this, and if you don't want to support it, that's okay. But I'm going to do it with or without you because it's about people and it's for their betterment. And, that was the motivation. So, if you're not on board, that's fine, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I think, that's the kind of trick of being a leader is that you haven't got a path to follow. You're the groundbreaker. You're making moves, and you constantly check in and make sure. Actually, I think this is going in the right direction. I've had some positive feedback. I might reassess over here. That's to me. And again, what I saw displayed from my elders was good leadership.
Yeah.
It wasn't my way or the highway, and it was humility.
Yeah.
And community. I succeed when my community succeeds, and those sort of concepts mean it's not about the individual. It's not a bloody thing where, oh, look at me, look at me. None of that. Um, so yeah, I think leadership around the world. If you have the decision-making power, if you have some, for instance, you've got your hands on some money funding this sort of thing that uplifts people, that would be something that I would put that into rather than bombs or something like that.
Indeed. Indeed. And it's really striking me as you're talking that if we're serious about peer leadership, if we're serious about improving e equality of access and equity of outcome, if we're serious about
Yeah,
reaching people who we find it hard to hear, then this is an absolutely key part of a strategy that actually would
yeah,
help us
absolutely.
if we're serious to people, then
Mm.
actually the kind of work we're discussing here is absolutely essential to
Yeah,
getting that right.
yeah, absolutely essential. Because it is, if you can get it right, again, that goes towards the uplifting of people's mana, their respect. Um, and as I sort of mentioned before, I was lucky in that my work supported what I was doing. So I did all the blood, sweat, and tears. I went to people;
Yeah,
they didn't have to come to me. I provided food and drink and looked after them, all around this country, and actually a couple of places overseas, so that all they had to do was turn up and talk, and it was like that, and it was hundreds of people, organizations, individuals, whānau, that's family, to get it right. I had to make that effort so that they had very little to do, and that brought more people out. They just went, well, this is a great kaupapa, a great issue, topic, theme that he's doing on the smell of an oily rag, his own sort of stuff. So we'll turn out in our droves to help with that. So again, I think if leaders have access to support, funds, even transport, stuff like that, why not give towards something like this that makes it easier for the sort of work that people like myself do? And in the end, it does help people that have, lots of hard things to deal with.
Kerry, that's been incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And we will share with people a link to the work, some of the work that you've been describing. So if people want to have a look at it,
Great.
they can go and have a look at it. But thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And best of luck with expanding the scale of the work in a manageable and funded way.
Yeah. Cheers, Peter. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Ngā mihi te nō koutou.